Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's often said that the hardest part about love isn't falling in it, it's trusting it. But what happens when that trust is shattered, when the person you loved more than life itself proves to be the one who could destroy you the most? What if everything you knew about your life, your relationship, your future, was a lie? Sarah had always believed that her love story was one for the ages, a college romance that blossomed into a fairy tale marriage. They were the couple everyone admired. From the outside, they were perfect. And Sarah had never doubted that James, her husband, felt the same way. But what Sarah didn't know was that sometimes the person closest to you is the one who can hurt you the most, and sometimes the signs are there all along, if only you knew how to read them. It wasn't until one fateful evening that everything began to unravel. One moment that would change Sarah's life forever. It started with something small, something Sarah had seen 100 times before, but this time, it felt different. She picked up James's phone while he was in the shower. At first, it was a random act, just out of curiosity, nothing more. But what she found wasn't just an empty screen. It was a secret, hidden in plain sight. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The messages, the pictures, they weren't meant for her eyes. They weren't meant for anyone who wasn't involved in a betrayal so cruel, so devastating, that it made Sarah question her very identity. Was she still the woman who had believed in James? Was this the same man she'd built her life with? The texts were clear, yet they were riddled with lies. But the real shock wasn't just the content. It was the realization that Sarah had been living in a dream, and that dream had been poisoned from the inside out. As the pieces began to fall into place, Sarah's world crumbled. Was the life she had built, a life of love, laughter, and hope, really just a facade? What would she do now that she knew the truth? Could she ever forgive him? Could she even trust herself? From the moment Sarah met James in college, their bond was something special. She had always been skeptical about love, seeing it as something fleeting and untrustworthy, but James had changed all of that. He was kind, thoughtful, and always there when she needed him. They had shared late-night conversations, early morning walks, and countless memories. They'd quickly become inseparable, so much so that friends and family began calling them the perfect couple. They didn't just share their lives, they were each other's rock. When James proposed to her on a quiet evening by the lake, Sarah didn't hesitate. She said yes before he could even finish the question. It felt like fate. It felt like destiny. Their wedding was an extravagant affair, and Sarah couldn't have been happier. She was married to the love of her life, the man who promised to never let her go. In the years that followed, their love seemed to flourish. Their home was filled with warmth, and their social circle often marveled at their closeness. James was successful in his career, while Sarah balanced a job and raising their 2 children with grace. People often commented on how well they balanced everything. "You two have it all figured out," they'd say. "You're the kind of couple others dream of." But what they didn't know, what Sarah couldn't see, was that perfection doesn't always last. The small things, the subtle shifts in behavior, began to surface, but they were easy to ignore. James had always been the one to take care of everything. If there was ever an issue, he'd smooth it over, always reassuring Sarah with that familiar smile that made her feel safe. But over time, that smile began to change. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden shift in personality. But the small moments began to add up. James would stay late at work more often, and when he came home, he was always distracted. Sarah attributed this to stress, to the increasing pressure at work. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Still, she didn't press him. He was her husband, and she trusted him. Their relationship was rock solid, or so she thought. But trust, once broken, doesn't always show its cracks immediately. It takes time, and that time was running out. The first signs of trouble were subtle, almost imperceptible. James began coming home later from work than from business meetings. His excuses were always valid, but they never quite felt real. His phone, once an open book, became a guarded object. He began leaving it face down on the kitchen counter, and his responses to her casual questions about his day grew more curt, more distant. Sarah's instincts kicked in, but she didn't want to believe it. She dismissed the thought. He had never given her a reason to doubt him, until now. One evening, while Sarah was preparing dinner, she overheard a conversation between James and one of his co-workers. "I'll see you tonight. Same place?" James had said it in a tone Sarah had never heard before. A tone that was too intimate for a simple work relationship. She felt a chill run down her spine, but once again she pushed it aside. Maybe it was just a work affair. Maybe she was being paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it refused to be ignored. Over the following weeks, the behavior became more obvious. James's texts, which he used to share with Sarah, became increasingly private. He would get up in the middle of the night to take phone calls in another room. When Sarah asked who it was, he would shrug it off, saying it was just a client or work-related. But Sarah's intuition told her otherwise. The nagging feeling grew stronger with every passing day. Could it be that James was hiding something from her? She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe everything was just as it always had been. But the doubt gnawed at her, eating away at her peace of mind. Every small action, every evasive response from James felt like another piece of the puzzle. One evening, after another suspicious encounter with James's phone, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. It wasn't something she had ever considered doing before, but something inside her told her that she had to know the truth. When James left for a late meeting, she grabbed his phone from the counter, her heart pounding in her chest. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want to invade his privacy, didn't want to confront the truth if it meant destroying everything they had built. But the overwhelming need for answers pushed her forward. She unlocked his phone without hesitation, her fingers shaking. And what she found made her stomach churn. The messages were explicit. They were written in a tone that was all too familiar, yet horrifyingly alien. They were from a woman Sarah had never met, someone James had been texting for weeks. The messages spoke of secret rendezvous, stolen moments, and a love that Sarah had never known existed. She read them over and over, each line cutting deeper than the last. There was no doubt about it. James had been having an affair. The weight of the discovery hit her like a tidal wave. Everything she had believed about her marriage, about the man she had devoted her life to, was shattered in an instant. The texts weren't the only thing that proved the betrayal. They were the evidence, but it was the emotional toll of the realization that cut the deepest. She had trusted him. She had given him everything, and now she had nothing. In a daze, Sarah put the phone down and sat on the couch, her mind spinning. How could he do this to her? To their children? To the life they had built together? The anger and heartbreak were overwhelming, but there was something else too. A sense of betrayal so deep it was almost physical. When James returned, he immediately noticed something was wrong. His face went pale as Sarah confronted him, the phone in her hand, her voice steady but trembling. "How could you do this?" she whispered, the question more rhetorical than anything else. "How long?" James tried to explain, but Sarah couldn't hear him. The words felt like empty excuses. The man she had loved for so long now felt like a stranger. And as the reality of the situation hit her, Sarah knew that there was no going back. Absolutely. Let's continue from where we left off. I'll further expand the next sections of the story to maintain the same dramatic tone and pacing, while also keeping the narrative engaging and emotional. In the hours that followed the confrontation, Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sadness that she couldn't shake off. She could hardly process the depth of James's betrayal. The person who had promised to love her forever, to cherish her through thick and thin, had not only broken that promise, but shattered the foundation of their entire life together. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the lies, the deceit, the years of hidden truth that had been buried beneath a veil of love and trust. James, for his part, was frantic. His apologies came in a flood, desperate and pleading. He kept repeating how sorry he was, how much he regretted what he had done. But for Sarah, it was like hearing empty words. They had lost their meaning in the face of what he had done. His guilt was palpable. But it didn't change the fact that Sarah's world had been turned upside down. "I never meant to hurt you," James said, his voice trembling as he stood in front of Sarah, watching her carefully for any sign of forgiveness. "You didn't mean to?" Sarah echoed, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You have hurt me, James, and you can't undo that." Her words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. She had always believed that their love was invincible, that nothing could tear them apart. But now, standing there in their living room, Sarah realized just how fragile their relationship had always been. Trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. How could it? The lies were too deep, the betrayal too real. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself caught in a storm of emotions that ranged from fury to sorrow. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, asking herself if there was any way to move forward from this. She had loved James with all of her heart, and now that love felt like a distant memory, a dream she couldn't quite hold on to anymore. James was doing everything in his power to make amends. He called her constantly, sent her flowers, and even offered to end things with the woman he had been seeing. But Sarah wasn't sure if it mattered anymore. No amount of flowers or apologies could erase the image of those texts, the rawness of the betrayal. She had trusted him more than anyone in the world, and now that trust felt like a hollow shell. Friends and family were divided. Some of Sarah's closest friends urged her to leave James, to take her children and walk away from the man who had broken her heart. They couldn't understand why she would even consider staying with him. "You deserve better," they would say. "You deserve someone who values you." And while Sarah knew they meant well, they didn't understand what she was going through. This wasn't just about a betrayal. It was about a life she had built, a family, years of memories. How do you just walk away from everything you've ever known? Other people, including James's family, insisted that Sarah should forgive him. "Everyone makes mistakes," they said. "Give him another chance." But what they didn't understand was that forgiveness wasn't the problem. Trust was. And trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. Sarah spent countless hours alone, reflecting on what to do. She tried to ignore the well-meaning advice from friends and family, and instead she focused on herself. What did she want? What did she need? For the first time in years, Sarah realized that she had to put herself first. She had spent so much of her life focusing on James, on her family, on being the perfect wife and mother. But now, in the aftermath of this heartbreak, Sarah realized that she couldn't continue to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of others. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. And it wasn't without guilt. Sarah loved James. They had shared so much, built so much, and there was a part of her that still wanted to hold on to the man she had married. But deep down, she knew that staying in this marriage would mean sacrificing her own happiness. It would mean settling for a relationship that had lost its foundation, a relationship built on lies. In the end, it wasn't a moment of clarity or a burst of emotion that made Sarah's decision for her. It was a quiet, deliberate realization, a slow understanding that she deserved more than what she had been given. She deserved respect. She deserved love. And she deserved honesty. One afternoon, as James was once again pleading with her to forgive him, Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to let go. She had to walk away from the man she thought she would grow old with. The pain in her heart was almost unbearable, but she understood now that it was the only way to heal. There was no future with James, not after everything that had happened. With a heavy heart, Sarah sat down with him and, for the first time, truly looked at him. Not as the man she had married, but as the stranger who had betrayed her. "James, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it isn't. You've broken my heart, and I can't find a way back from that. I need to choose myself." The words were harder to say than anything she had ever uttered, but they were necessary. As she watched James's face fall, as his shoulders slumped with the weight of her decision, Sarah felt a sense of release. It wasn't the end she had imagined, but it was the end she needed. James begged her, of course. He promised he would do anything to fix things. He offered therapy, counseling, and even swore he would sever ties with the other woman. But Sarah had already made up her mind. The trust between them was gone, and without trust, there could be no future. It wasn't about vengeance or punishment. It was about self-respect. It was about honoring herself, something she had neglected for far too long. She asked him to leave. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As James packed his things, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's heart ached for the family they once had, for the future they had planned. But deep down, she knew this was the only way forward. This was the only way to regain the strength she had lost. As he walked out the door, Sarah took a deep breath. There was no going back, but in that moment, she realized that sometimes moving forward means letting go of what you thought you could never live without. As Sarah stood alone in the doorway, watching James drive away, she didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how long it would take to heal or if she would ever fully trust again. But what she did know was that she was strong. She had survived the worst betrayal of her life, and she had made it out the other side. The next chapter of her life was uncertain, but it was hers to write. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah realized that the greatest love she could ever have was the one she had for herself. She didn't need anyone else to validate her worth. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was enough. She already knew it. The journey ahead would be difficult, and there would be moments of doubt, but Sarah was ready to face whatever came next. She had survived the ultimate betrayal, and that made her unstoppable. So, what do you think? Could you forgive someone who betrayed you in such a devastating way? Would you be able to rebuild trust after something like this? I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you would do if you were in Sarah's shoes. Could you ever forgive? Or is a betrayal like this unforgivable? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more relationship dramas with twists and turns, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an emotional journey.